Hey, what's up, guys? I get this question all the time. Basically, we're going to talk swim baits. Swim baits slash, they could be used as trailers as well. These are the two baits in question. We got the Rage Swimmer. Let me get it out. And we're going to talk about when to throw this, or why I throw this. And then I'll get this white one out when I throw the Swim'n Caffeine Shad. Okay? These are basically the two baits that can be used for the same thing, but they have totally different actions. And we're going to talk about why I use them and what applications. First off, if I'm going to, when I look at this, to me, the Rage Swimmer replaced a more realistic view in open water of the swim jig. Now, I was throwing like a swim jig to mimic anything like shad patterns, man, way back, long time ago, in the late 2000s. I started doing it on Rayburn in the grass and things like that. You know, at the time, swim jigs were mainly, especially white ones, were looked at like right on the surface or subsurface, kind of like an alternate to a frog. And I was like, man, I used it as an alternative to like a rattle trap, red eye, things like that. No one was doing it. It was phenomenal. It was basically like the chatterbait had come out, but once again, it was more vibration. This was silent but deadly, right? I know, I just said that. Now, this to me was the alternative in open water to that. Like, it was hard to throw a big bulky swim jig, big old white swim jig with a tail on it, and fish started getting to like, hey, I know what that is, I'm not going to bite that. This was the slimmed down version, right? Didn't have the skirt or anything. It just looked more natural. So this came along, and man, I actually didn't jump on the trend with it as early as I should have. I was so used to getting bit on that swim jig when no one else was, and no one was really throwing it, that I didn't switch in time. When I did, it was back when I started fishing the tour. Man, it was like I made a lot of videos on this bait because I could take this bait and throw it anywhere in the country. It was like the one bait I always had tied on no matter where I went. It was what I made a top 5 at the FLW tour in St. Clair. I caught them on Kentucky Lake. It didn't matter. I caught them everywhere. Schooling fish, smallmouth, big largemouth, it didn't matter. It's what I threw on the squadron head, on a jig head, and just reeled it just like I would a swim jig, but not around cover. It was more open water. Now, this bait compared to this bait, if you can see, if I do this, right, this is going to, here's another way. So do you see how much more this lays over than this one? Okay, especially right here. What you're going to get with this is a giant wag of the tail. Okay, the bait doesn't roll so much, but the tail has a giant back and forth action to it. That's the action you get with this. With this is a lot tighter wobble, and the tail still goes back and forth, but what it does is it makes this bait rotate back and forth just like this. Okay, so I typically throw this on a swim jig as a trailer.
All right, that's back where I got that other bite. Unless that's my same fish swimming around with my swim jig. Maybe not. Maybe it is, and I'll get my swim jig back. Man, that freaking grass is thick. Unless I got a big one on. I mean, I do have a good one on. All right. Get him going. Keep him going in there.
I've thrown both, and for a while I thought this was so good, I used to put this on the back of a swim jig and caught a bunch of fish on it. If you put it on the back of a swim jig, you'll have not a lot of movement in your swim jig, and then you get this tail in the back of it just kicking, which might be really good. I though tend to go back to the old school, because these were before this, and I'd put this on the back, and that made that swim jig kind of roll back and forth. And I think you just get more action out of it and more vibration out of the swim jig as you would opposed to this. So those are the two main reasons of why I throw this more on a swim jig and this more by itself. Now, I also put this like on a flashy swimmer, like an owner flashy swimmer. I wasn't throwing in the right spot. This thing's gonna work. I'm not gonna get hung up. I got a plan for tomorrow now. I'm gonna go try some things. You can do the same thing with this. Like I said, it kind of depends on what you're doing. Down here where we live, I throw this a lot. We got really big fish down here. We got big gizzard shad. So I throw this mainly on the owner flashy swimmer by itself, not this as much. I know a lot of guys that do throw this. I got a buddy that throws this more in the fall and more in the spring. I haven't got that detailed in yet, where I'm like dialed in to know when to choose. But this seems to always work for me in those two applications. This seems to always work with me on a swim jig. Now, if I'm gonna throw it like weedless style, and the flashy swimmer is weedless, but if I'm just gonna put just a regular hook on here, you can either Texas rig it or you can get a belly weighted hook. And I'm gonna reel it fast to cover water, and on top of things, I'm throwing this. I'm throwing this because of the tail, right? Because of the action of the tail. A lot of times I'll throw the 575, the real big one. I want something moving a lot of water, being very disturbant, like creating a whole bunch of action. The other one gets more vibration, but if I want a ton of action because it's on top of the water, I'm gonna throw this bait. This is my go-to bait also on Alabama rigs. So, and not this big one, but I'll throw the small ones on the Alabama rig. I think once again, the Alabama rig is kind of gaudy, kind of big. It's got freaking wires. It's got spinners everywhere. You know, I also want the baits to be doing the same thing. I want 5 of them just going to town. So. So I prefer this over this on that. Like I said, this bait though, a lot of times if I want to get very, very subtle, right, in the grass or any of that stuff, I'll throw this. It's a more subtle bait in the sense of it's not creating a bunch of action, but it is creating a bunch of sound, right, for that inner ear of the fish. I think that's what it's doing, is more vibration. It gets more movement on anything you put on it. So like I said, if I wanted more movement on a thunder cricket, a swim jig, anything like that, I'll put that on, this on there. Now, what's cool about these are, this was pretty much what we used to throw back in the day. They came along and we started throwing this on a Texas rig with a very, very, very lightweight, like a 1/16 ounce. I mean, just a super lightweight. We peg it and Texas rig it. And we used to drag this thing, and you can almost, you don't really Texas rig it, but you kind of can just reel it along the bottom, especially in the springtime up there, really, really shallow. That's what we used to do. Like I said, we wanted it subtle. In the springtime was better. It wasn't in the water. It was like either right over the grass, like touching the grass constantly, or we were dragging it almost on the bottom. And we used to catch these pre-spawners and fish on beds like that. Like I said, I didn't want something that was all going crazy erratic. I wanted something just being real subtle on the bottom, reeling it very, very slow. And you didn't have this big tail action. You just kind of had this thing creeping along the bottom. So that was what we used to do with this back in the day. I still do it at times. I sometimes forget with all the thousands of baits now. But that was a cool trick we used to do with this bait. Basically what you got is two baits that I use totally different. They look, for the most part, in the scheme of things, they look very similar, right? But I definitely do use them for two applications. If y'all have seen tons of my swim jig videos, you know I have this on all the time. If you see my open water stuff, I have that. That's basically the two differences of when to throw which. And I think try them both out. You got to have both of them. Like I said, if you're gonna go swim jigging, have this one. If you're gonna go open water, have this one. Either way, they both catch a lot of fish. All right, see you guys.